There are some footballers whose downfalls, if we are being honest, didn't come as an enormous surprise. Hatem Ben Arfa had enough talent to win a Ballon d'Or, but the attitude of a Kardashian and the work rate of a British aristocrat. Mario Balotelli had all of the tools to become a world-class centre-forward, but was as mad as a box of frogs on acid listening to the Happy Mondays, and didn't know how to put a bib on, and Mark Bosnich was an extremely promising goalkeeper early on in his career at Aston Villa, but he was allergic to training and snorted more cocaine than Charlie Sheen in a lock-in at Pablo Escobar's house. Garrincha, meanwhile, was one of the greatest dribblers and indeed players of all time, but given his alcoholism, inner demons, and the fact that he allegedly lost his virginity to a goat, his premature demise probably shouldn't come as that much of a surprise. The same goes for players, tragic as it may be, who are struck down by serious injuries. Ansu Fati, for example, I felt sure was destined to become one of the best players in the world when he broke through at Barcelona, a bit like Lamine Yamal now, but a serious meniscus tear just after he turned 18 ruled him out for 12 months, and he has been blighted by injury setbacks ever since. Likewise, Alexander Pato, Adriano, Michael Owen, Mario Götze, Michu, Jack Wilshere, Radamel Falcao, and, most famously of all, Marco van Basten, all had their careers curtailed by chronic or career-ending injuries which came out of the blue, but it wasn't as though the reason for their demise was unknown. Even Eden Hazard, who seemed to go from being some people's pick as the third best player in the world behind Messi and Ronaldo when he joined Real Madrid for a potential €146 million back in the summer of 2019, to being almost entirely useless in the blink of an eye, probably shouldn't have come as quite as much of a surprise as it did. For all of his undoubted talent, Hazard was always described as being uninterested in training and having a terrible diet, even by his own teammates. John Obi Mikel called Hazard the laziest footballer he's ever seen, and in his late 20s, when injuries began to hit, it makes sense that Hazard struggled to return to his previous heights. I recently came across this post by Twitter user @TMZ, apologies TMZ if that's not how it's pronounced, which reads, quote, "Ramsdale's downfall genuinely kills me. Dude probably thought he was going to be a title-winning keeper and England's number one for the next decade, and 18 months later he's destined for the championship." End quote. I sincerely hope that Ramsdale's downfall doesn't genuinely kill him and that he is still alive and well, but it got me thinking about what are some of the most sudden, unexpected, and most incomprehensible downfalls in football. I tweeted that exact question because who's got the time to research things themselves these days? Far smarter to outsource your workload to your own fans, like when an artist turns the microphone to the crowd and gets them to sing half of their own songs back to them after the audience have each paid £150 for a ticket. And it got almost 5,000 likes and over 350 quote tweets or replies. Only about 60 of them made my shortlist. No offence, there were some duplicates in there, which I have painstakingly whittled down to a final 7 because, it's only reasonable that I do some work of my own. Actually, 2 of my final 7 weren't even among the more than 350 audience suggestions. I'll let you try and figure out which 2. Without further ado then, who obviously actually did have one of football's most famous downfalls, but which cannot be described as unexplained, given that I have literally made a 28-minute documentary explaining it, here are some of the most unexpected downfalls in the history of football. 7th, Jack Butland. That Aaron Ramsdale tweet was the inspiration for this video, although some would make the case that his downfall shouldn't be all that surprising, given his 2 relegations before joining Arsenal and occasional wobbles during his 2 seasons as the club's number 1, but I must admit that in researching this video, I was surprised by just how many goalkeepers made my shortlist. When you think of goalkeepers, or when I do at least, you think of them typically peaking later on than outfield players, but also being more consistent once they are settled, and usually fairly difficult to dislodge once they've nailed down a starting berth. That perception might not align with reality though. I think that goalkeeping is such a lonely and isolated position, and therefore so dependent upon mental strength and confidence, that it can actually be quite easy for goalkeepers to crumble once something starts to go wrong. I'll give you some examples who didn't make my 7. Joe Hart won a record-breaking 4th Premier League Golden Glove at the age of only 28, exceeding Petr Cech's record at the time, having racked up more than 300 appearances for Man City and been England's undisputed number 1 for over 6 years. But after Pep Guardiola came in and made an immediate judgment that he didn't want Hart, his career was thrown into a terminal death spiral. Either failed or inconsistent stints at Torino, West Ham and Burnley followed, and Hart was never the same goalkeeper again, playing his last game for England shortly after turning 30. David De Gea was for a number of years by far the best goalkeeper in the Premier League, if not the entire world at Manchester United, before a couple of high-profile mistakes at the 2018 World Cup seemed to knock him for 6. And he spent the entirety of last season, aged 32 and 33, without a club. Carlo Cudicini went from being one of the top performing keepers in the Premier League before Chelsea signed Petr Cech, knocking him down the pecking order, and he would never reassert himself as a number 1 anywhere else ever again, outside of a single final season with LA Galaxy. And Timo Hildebrand, who was being widely touted as Germany's next number 1 after winning the Bundesliga title with Stuttgart in 2007, only then to make an ill-fated move to Valencia, turn down Klopp's Dortmund, throwing his career and confidence into a state of turmoil from which he would never recover. So, yeah, as I said, there are quite a few. The goalkeeper who makes my 7, however, is Jack Butland, and you could be forgiven for forgetting just how swift and unexpected his downfall was. Fear not though, because I am about to remind you. It would be underwhelming if I just ended the segment there, wouldn't it? Butland was primed to be England's number 1. He represented the 3 Lions at every age group from the under-16s through to the senior team, racking up a whopping 28 appearances for the under-21s and making England's senior Euro 2012 squad when he was only 19 years old. Highly unusual for a goalkeeper, Butland was the second youngest member of that England squad and one of only 2 teenagers selected by Roy Hodgson, alongside Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. Butland joined Stoke City in the Premier League in 2013, and at the end of the 2017-18 season, there were several calls for Butland to be England's number 1 at the 2018 World Cup. Amidst reported interest from Chelsea, Liverpool, Wolves and Crystal Palace, it was claimed that Stoke valued Butland at £70 million, which would make him the second most expensive goalkeeper of all time to this day, trailing only Kepa Arrizabalaga. Stoke City boss Paul Lambert laughed off the idea that Stoke would even entertain the idea of selling Butland for as little as £35 million, joking that £35 million wouldn't be enough to buy one of his gloves. 2 years later, Stoke sold Butland to Crystal Palace for a reported £1 million fee. If that's not a sudden and unexpected downfall, I'm not quite sure what is. Butland didn't sustain any significant injuries during that time, but he stayed at Stoke following their Premier League relegation. In the Championship, however, Butland's form in a torrid Stoke City team, which ought to have run away with the league title but instead finished 16th, fell apart, and his confidence looked to have been shot to pieces. The fact that that had happened in the second tier, not in the Premier League, made his stock plummet within the space of 12 months. In 3 years contracted to Crystal Palace, Butland made just 10 league appearances, only starting to play regular first-team football again after joining Rangers in 2023, and he hasn't played for England since 2018. 6th. Arda Turan. I know what some of you might be thinking, but Alfie, Arda Turan is a nutter, and you said that ruled out Mario Balotelli, so why not him as well? And it is a valid point. While Arda Turan is a loose cannon, and that really is the most fitting description for him, for reasons we will soon come on to, unlike with Mario Balotelli, who was clearly off his rocker even when he was producing his best football for Inter Milan and Manchester City, when Turan was at his best, it wasn't widely known that he was quite so volatile. In actual fact, he was widely lauded as being an excellent professional with an outstanding work rate at Atletico Madrid, which saw him flourish under Diego Simeone, who loves a grafter and someone who won't shirk a challenge. That was Turan, signed by Atletico from Galatasaray in the summer of 2011, who was explosive both on and off the ball, with his quick feet, creativity and excellent technique, but also boundless energy, industry, and determination to try and win the ball back high up the pitch. He was a key man for Atletico as they won the La Liga title and reached the Champions League final in the 2013-14 season, and again in 2014-15 when they slipped to third place in La Liga and only reached the Champions League quarter-final. It was that which prompted Barcelona, who had just won a quite remarkable treble under Luis Enrique, with the famed Messi, Suarez, Neymar forward line, and Xavi, Iniesta, Busquets and Rakitic as options in midfield, to add Thuram to their impressive ranks. Thuram's fine form in Madrid meant that he commanded a potential €41 million fee, but the move immediately got off to a terrible start. Barcelona were under a transfer ban, which meant that, although they were able to sign Thuram and Alex Vidal from Sevilla, they weren't actually able to register either of them, and therefore play them, until January. For someone who is so intense, an extended period on the sidelines was a disaster for Thuram, killing the momentum that he had built up at Atletico. It also meant that, when January finally came around, Thuram was nowhere near match fit, which isn't ideal when you've got the likes of Messi, Neymar, and Iniesta for competition. Having flourished playing on either flank for Atletico, most of Thuram's limited minutes at Barca came through the middle, where his explosive style didn't really fit in with Barca's more patient and structured possession-based football. Overnight, a bit like Alexis Sánchez at Manchester United, who also made my shortlist, Thuram seemed to go from being a force of nature, unplayable at his best, to a bit of a non-entity, lacking any of that drive and dynamism that made him the player that he was, and bringing very little to the party. His downfall was completed at Istanbul Başakşehir, a club with close ties to Thuram's close friend and Turkey's authoritarian president for life, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, where he failed to impress even in the Turkish Super League, received a 16-match ban, the longest in the history of Turkish football, for pushing an assistant referee, later reduced to 10 games, and received a 2-year and 8-month suspended prison sentence for firing a gun in a hospital. I'm not making that up. That is an actual thing that actually happened. Başakşehir, despite Thuram's friendship with Erdogan, terminated the loan deal prematurely, and after 2 seasons back at Galatasaray, Thuram retired from football following a season in which he made 7 league appearances, scored 0 goals, and made no assists. Thuram may actually have taken more shots inside of a hospital than he did in his last season playing for Gala. Downfalls don't come much bigger or more unexpected than that. 5th, João Cancelo. Genuinely, in this entire video, this might be the downfall that was the most shocking and unexpected to me. I haven't put it first because I suspect other people will find the next 4 even more surprising. I'm not some kind of egomaniac that just thinks the world revolves around me, but whereas I can pinpoint some kind of nagging doubt that might have hinted at a downfall, however unlikely with the others, this one came totally out of the blue to me. Across the 2020-21 and 2021-22 seasons as a whole, I think Cancelo was probably the best fullback in world football, as Manchester City hoovered up back-to-back Premier League titles. Played predominantly at left-back in the 2021-22 season, rather than his usual role at right-back, Cancelo was defensively sound, positionally outstanding, faultless in possession, he had tremendous athleticism, and he was a menace in the opposition's half, scoring 3 goals and making 10 assists. He quite rightly made the PFA Team of the Year, the ESM Team of the Year, and the FIFPro World 11, as well as earning himself a Ballon d'Or nomination. Within the chaos of Pep Roulette, Cancelo barely missed a game, registering 36 out of a possible 38 Premier League appearances, and 52 appearances in all competitions. No one played more games that season for the Citizens, not even Rodri or Edison. It seemed bizarre, and totally inexplicable therefore, that Cancelo's game time was so harshly reduced at the start of the 2022-23 season, and diluted further still following the 2022 World Cup. According to reports at the time, Guardiola and Cancelo had fallen out over Cancelo's complaints at having to share minutes with Nathan Ake and Rico Lewis, reports that, it should be noted, Cancelo strongly denies. Cancelo didn't offer a counter-narrative other than saying that Manchester City didn't want him anymore, which is why, in the January transfer window, he went on loan to Bayern Munich with a view to a permanent. Cancelo wasn't bad in Bavaria, but Bayern chose not to exercise the option to sign him at the end of the loan deal, bringing in Rafael Guerreiro on a free transfer instead. A loan deal to Barcelona last summer followed, which involved taking a pay cut, and Cancelo made it clear throughout last season that he would like to stay at the Camp Nou. For whatever reason, tactical, financial, or because they just didn't think that he was that good, Barcelona refused to meet Manchester City's €25 million asking price this summer, and the only team that did was Saudi Pro League side Al Hilal. From possibly, if not, I think, quite probably, the best fullback in the world in 2022, to 2 loan moves and being shipped off to Saudi Arabia, albeit on a very healthy wage, at the age of only 30 is a pretty rapid demise, and certainly one that I never saw coming. With the benefit of hindsight, there were rumours that Cancelo's character or attitude was part of the reason why he was sold by Juventus, which, if true, and it is a big if, which I don't really like dabbling in, might have made a repeat scenario at the Etihad less surprising. Pep Guardiola has always been incredibly ruthless in fairness, even with players seemingly at the peak of their powers, and Cancelo departed at a time when Pep, among other elite-level managers, seemed to turn towards centre-backs like Ake or later Josko Gvardiol being deployed as fullbacks for tactical reasons, rather than more attack-minded fullbacks like Cancelo. Even taking all of that into account though, I still think this one was pretty wild. Fourth, Saido Berahino. As with Arda Turan, I can already hear some of you thinking, Saido Berahino? But there was loads of talk about him being a poor professional at the end of his time at West Brom, and having a terrible work ethic at Stoke. How can his downfall be more unexpected than Antonio Cassano or Hatem Ben Arfa's for that reason? Firstly, you're not wrong. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised. I have an extremely intelligent audience, unlike most football YouTube channels, who really do seem to attract primarily the knuckle-dragging dregs of society. Glenn Johnson described Berahino's attitude at Stoke as being as though he had a vendetta against the club, and said that if he was the owner of a football club, he wouldn't sign Berahino even if he paid him, rather than the other way around. All of that is true, undoubtedly, but counterpoint here. Berahino scored 14 league goals and 20 at all competitions for West Brom, who were one of the lowest scoring teams in the Premier League at the time, in the 2014-15 season, aged only 21, outscoring Romelu Lukaku, Robin van Persie and Wayne Rooney, and earning himself a senior England call-up. And now he plays in the second tier of Indian football for a team with a 3,000 capacity stadium at the age of 31. This isn't Antonio Cassano not quite cracking it at Real Madrid due to a diet consisting primarily of lard and donuts, and falling out with every manager he ever played under, but still winning a Serie A title with AC Milan, becoming a Sampdoria hero, and representing Italy for 11 whole years, or Hatem Ben Arfa having failed stints with 2 European giants, PSG and Hull City, but continuing to play top-flight football elsewhere and earning an international recall with France. You would have thought, given his level at 21, as the youngest player among the Premier League's top scorers, even with a stinking attitude, Berahino would have carved out a half-decent career for himself. In actual fact, from being one of the most sought-after forwards in the Premier League, valued at £30 million by West Brom, after a move to Tottenham collapsed, sadly, so too did Berahino's career. A move to Stoke, who Berahino never really wanted to join, for a potential £15 million was a disaster, as Berahino went a quite incredible 913 days, that is roughly 2.5 years, without finding the back of the net. Stoke were relegated from the Premier League, and even in the Championship, Berahino only managed to score 3 goals in 23 games. Moves to Belgium, Sheffield Wednesday, Cyprus and most recently India have followed, as Berahino has tried and failed to resurrect what was once such a promising career. When one thinks that Berahino scored 11 goals in only 12 appearances for England under-21s, and was benching Harry Kane at the time while Kane's club Tottenham tried to sign him, and then you compare and contrast their 2 careers since then, it is pretty remarkable. And, with all of the context in the world, he still had to make this 7. Third, Gaizka Mendieta. A name that might not even be familiar to most football fans under the age of about 25, Gaizka Mendieta was once named as the best midfielder in Europe in successive seasons, 1999 to 2000 and 2000 to 2001, ahead of the likes of Roy Keane, Pavel Nedved and Zinedine Zidane, earning consecutive Ballon d'Or nominations. It was off the back of that roaring success, in which Mendieta was the star man in a Valencia team that made back-to-back Champions League finals, that he joined Lazio for almost €50 million, becoming the sixth most expensive footballer of all time. Mendieta had personally favoured a move to Real Madrid, who had tried and failed to sign him, after Valencia demanded an almost world record fee to sell him to a divisional rival. Mendieta's move to Lazio instead was, officially, the best midfielder in Europe at the time, over the last 2 seasons, joining a club that had just won their Serie A title. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? As it transpired, just about everything. Having thrived with the freedom afforded to him at Valencia, Mendieta looked to be shackled by the more disciplined and defensive football that prevailed in Italy at the time. Following a season adjusting to life in Serie A, Lazio were rocked by a financial scandal implicating their owners and a major financial crisis, and Mendieta was made available to other clubs. Mendieta's reputation was still high enough for Barcelona to come calling, but after a season on loan at the Camp Nou, he found himself in Middlesbrough. Not by accident, they had actually signed him. Borough were a decent team when Mendieta arrived, but it still seemed like a stunning change of scenery to go from finishing above Steven Gerrard, Roberto Baggio and Patrick Vieira in Ballon d'Or voting to playing at the Riverside in just 18 months. Mendieta's career just sort of fizzled out at Borough, where he suffered injury problems in fairness, but his remarkable downfall had already taken effect before they kicked in, earning him a, probably unwanted, spot in third in this video. Mendieta invests in Spanish restaurants in England now though, so, all's well that ends well. Second, Darko Panchev. I almost left this one out on a point of principle, like with Neil Franklin's downfall from being the first name on the England team sheet and the best defender on the planet, to a total outcast forced to play second division football and exiled from the England team within the space of just 6 weeks for entirely non-footballing reasons, which probably is, objectively, the most unexpected downfall in the history of football, simply because I've talked about both of them in the past. Well, I actually wrote an entire book a few years ago about one of them. In the end, though, I just couldn't leave Panchev out. At the start of the 1990s, Panchev was one of, if not the best striker in the world. In 3 seasons at Red Star Belgrade, he scored 97 goals in 115 games, winning 3 successive Yugoslav First League titles, a Yugoslav Cup, an Intercontinental Cup, and, most famously, the European Cup, in which Panchev converted the winning penalty in the shootout in the final against Marseille. It capped off a season which saw Panchev finish joint second in Ballon d'Or voting, trailing only Jean-Pierre Papin, who scored fewer goals than him that season, and whose team, Red Star, beat in the European Cup final. When the Iron Curtain fell, the breakup of Yugoslavia began, and the Yugoslav Wars broke out, footballers fled the former Yugoslavia as quickly as refugees, and none were in higher demand from Europe's elite than Panchev himself. Despite interest from everyone from Real Madrid and Juventus to AC Milan and Barcelona, Panchev ended up at Inter Milan, who had finished 8th in Serie A the previous season. Panchev was meant to be the signing that revived Inter. Instead, it was Inter that killed Panchev. Not literally, I should clarify, he is still alive and well, age 58 now, but figuratively speaking, in terms of his career. I know most of you will have got that first time around, but there is always someone in the comments. There were early red flags when manager Osvaldo Bagnoli wanted Panchev to be a completely different player to the one Inter had signed from Red Star, and when Panchev didn't immediately adapt to those demands, he found himself out of the squad entirely because Inter had 4 foreign players at a time when they were only allowed to name 3 in each matchday squad. Panchev only made 16 appearances in his debut campaign, scoring 6 goals, and almost departed mid-season to Manchester United. It would have been a blessing had that move materialised because, at the San Siro, Panchev entered a state of permanent decline. The following season, Panchev's relationship with Bagnoli deteriorated to such an extent that he failed to register a single first-team appearance, and in the 1994-95 campaign, despite being thrown a lifeline when Bagnoli was replaced by Ottavio Bianchi, Panchev only made 13 appearances before being sent out on loan to VfB Leipzig. In short, Darko Panchev was one of the best players in the world for 3 or 4 years before joining Inter Milan in 1992, aged 26, but after that point, and that move, he only scored 16 more goals before retiring, still aged only 31 at the time. So, even if you've heard me ramble on about Panchev before, I hope you'll understand why he had to feature. First, Dele Alli. I had some hesitations about including Dele Alli in this 7 due to off-field issues that we'll come on to, but in actual fact, that is the exact reason why he is such a fitting top spot, for reasons that we will also come on to. In terms of the fundamentals, it's difficult to exaggerate just what an enormous talent Alli was during his first couple of seasons at Tottenham. In his debut campaign, age 19, having joined Spurs from League One MK Dons, Alli scored 10 goals and made 10 assists in 46 appearances. Just making 46 appearances for a team that finishes third in the Premier League at 19 is remarkable in of itself, let alone hitting double figures in terms of both goals and assists, and being one of their star men. He kicked on the following season though, at age 20, scoring an incredible 22 goals from attacking midfield, in addition to making 12 assists. Overall, Alli averaged a goal contribution once every 118 minutes. In the Premier League, Alli outscored both Eden Hazard and Zlatan Ibrahimovic. At 20 years old. I've said before, I was at Wembley when Alli made his senior international debut against France, and he scored a truly outrageous long-range effort against his Spurs teammate Hugo Lloris. It was one of those rare moments of awe that stops you in your tracks in regards to a young player in football, a bit like when Wayne Rooney scored that goal against Arsenal at 16, or when Michael Owen scored that goal against Argentina at the 1998 World Cup. In the summer of 2017, CIES ranked Alli as being the second most valuable footballer on the planet, behind Neymar, above Lionel Messi, Kylian Mbappe, and his own Spurs teammate Harry Kane, valued at more than 150 million euros. That's how high a regard Alli was held in. Unfortunately, though still so young, that was where Alli's career peaked. The following season, his output and performance levels dropped as he struggled to maintain consistency, then he suffered a hamstring injury, which seemed to set him back further and knock his confidence, and Maurizio Pochettino was subsequently replaced at Tottenham by Jose Mourinho. It was at that point that Alli just seemed to enter into some kind of terminal doom spiral. In the 2020-21 season, when Alli ought to have been coming into his peak, age 24, he scored just 3 goals and made 5 assists from 29 appearances, and the following season, age 25, that fell to 2 goals and 1 assist. During his time at Everton, Alli only made 13 appearances, failing to score or assist a single goal, and his last England cap came in 2019 when he was only 23. Certainly, in modern football, it is hard to think of a more unexpected or catastrophic downfall. The reasons behind Alli's plight are multifaceted, including ongoing mental health difficulties and an addiction to sleeping pills. Alli revealed in an interview with Gary Neville in 2023 that he had been a victim of sexual abuse as a child and had left those wounds untreated and to fester, refusing to accept help for a number of years. Alli's downfall, therefore, was incredibly unexpected from the outside, not caused primarily by any prior indication of a bad attitude, poor work rate, or injuries, but it isn't unexplained. It is the result of a web of unfortunate circumstances, events, and mental health difficulties, a whole host of factors that, despite being talked about slightly more in recent years, we almost never think about in relation to footballers. When a player's form falls off a cliff, our instinct is to blame them. They are lazy, unprofessional, or they have a weak mentality. I remember Jake Livermore went from being outstanding in his debut campaign at Hull City and the cusp of the England squad in the 2013-14 season to hopeless the following season, and I absolutely lambasted him. I used to see his Lamborghini parked outside of the casino in Hull, and there were all sorts of rumours flying around, which contributed to a general sense that he was a poor professional who'd maybe got comfortable and taken his eye off the ball, literally in some cases, after earning a permanent long-term contract at the club, contributing to our relegation that season. Then he failed a drugs test, testing positive for cocaine. It all fed into the same narrative. As it transpired, though, at the end of the 2013-14 season, in which Livermore had been excellent, and at the exact point in which his form fell to pieces, he and his partner's newborn son had tragically died, plunging Livermore into a deep and understandable depression. Ever since then, when I see a footballer lose form, confidence, or start behaving differently, I am a lot slower to judge. Sure, in some instances, they are probably idiots, but a lot of the time, there is likely something deeper going on there, which would cause almost all of us to perform worse at our jobs. All of the downfalls in this 7 were unexpected, but none of them were truly unexplained. Even in those cases where we don't know the full reasons, invariably, there is more to them than initially meets the eye. Anyway, that is it for today's video. There was a truly enormous list of honourable mentions that made my shortlist from all of your suggestions. Ricky Puig, Alexis Sánchez, Andrei Shevchenko, Philippe Coutinho, Fabinho, Paco Alcacer, Mario Jardel, Giovanni Dos Santos, Houssem Aouar, Todd Cantwell, Fernando Torres, Thomas Brolin, Christian Pavon, Stephen Ireland, Michael Johnson, Jadon Sancho, Michael Rensing, that was the goalkeeper by the way, Alan Halilovic, Marcus Madison, Johan Gerkhoff, Francis Jeffers, Kevin Grosskreutz, Mateo Kesman, Javier Saviola, Neil Franklin, Tanguy Ndombele, Jordan Rhodes, Philippe Christenval, Laurent Robert, and Nery Castillo were just some of the many suggestions. Actually, quite a few there, or at least it felt like it. I think I need my inhaler. So thank you for all of those suggestions, as I say, and thank you as ever for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video. I do sincerely hope that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course make sure that you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. Not just for this channel, no, I mean, why stop there? HITC Sevens, although that should be the first step, but also my second channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might fancy watching after this one. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, or Threads via the username @HITC Sevens on all three, should you wish to do so, and all of those links plus a whole lot more should be down in the video description below. Cheers!